I'm part of the security policy group, along with Neil Carter and Veronica Gonzalez and Lindsay Minima and Rociel Cardenas, who couldn't be here today. When you talk about security in Colombia, a lot of people first think about the FARC and the internal conflict that's been happening in the country there for the past 4 decades. But we wanted to pick a topic that's a little less studied. So we chose something called the BACRIM. It's a generic term. It means it's bandas criminales is what it's short for. A generic term used to describe a new type of criminal trend in Colombia. It's multiple disparate criminal organizations, which the government has termed the most serious threat facing Colombia, even more serious than the FARC. There are thousands of members. It's hard to get a strong estimate as to exactly who all is involved, how many there are. But for a sense of size, in 2007, the BACRIM were present in 102 municipalities, but they are currently present in 302 municipalities in 32 departments, departments being the equivalent of a state. The police attributed half of homicides in 2010 to the BACRIM. That's 7,200 homicides in 1 year. And as an example of their strength, one group, Los Arabeños, implemented what's been called an armed strike in January, which was in response to the death of their leader in a police raid. They basically brought life to a standstill in 6 states for 2 whole days. So they are growing in strength. There are 6 to 7 main groups, depending who you talk to, each with a different geographical area of control, and their characteristics and operations vary from group to group, as do their origins. Now, in our original research, a lot of sources we were using referred to them as remobilized paramilitaries. The paramilitaries were demobilized in 2006, primarily the large umbrella organization, the AUC. But the remobilized paramilitaries term is a vast oversimplification. The International Crisis Group prefers to call the BACRIM new illegally armed groups, to underscore the fact that this is a new trend that they haven't seen before in Colombia. It's different from the drug cartels, different from the guerrilla groups, et cetera. Many of them do have strong former paramilitary links. When the paramilitaries demobilized, some members did in fact lay down arms and reintegrate, and many did not, however. And they used their military-style training to take over control of area that the paramilitaries had controlled. They basically filled a void of power vacuum left by the AUC. Oops, sorry, lost my spot. Okay, so, but not all of them, however, come from paramilitary roots. 2, for example, 2 of the more powerful ones, Los Machos and Los Rastrojos, I always trip over that one, were in fact rival factions within the same drug cartel, the Norte del Valle cartel. And they got their operations, their start in 2002, so several years prior to demobilization. One of our key takeaways was that the BACRIM are businessmen at the core. They are interested in making money by whatever means necessary. 70% of their income comes from the narco traffic. The other 30% comes from, we'll call diversified portfolio of human trafficking, forced prostitution, illegal mining, extortion, et cetera, et cetera. All of their activity, including buying off and pressuring politicians, is all with the goal of solidifying their control and building their business, making more money. So the purpose of our research, we wanted to identify the various theories about the origins of the BACRIM, their leadership, their activities, and their characteristics, both as a collective and then individually, these different groups. And then further, we wanted to understand the government's response to the BACRIM and the challenges to their, within their response. So to accomplish this, we started with some extensive background research prior to the trip. And then while we were there, we held a lot of meetings with the National Police Intelligence Unit, the top BACRIM analyst at the Ministry of Defense, various US agencies who were involved in the drug war, and then a number of think tanks and NGOs so that we could get an outside of government perspective. We wanted to meet with this wide range of people so that, well, understanding first of all that there's vast disagreement about who they are, what their origins are, how you define them, and then also there's extensive criticism from sources outside of government about the government's response to these groups. And so we wanted to make sure that we got a whole picture. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Neil.
All right. Now, regarding the government response, government meaning the actual government of Colombia, um, it's important to point out here that the government doesn't actually consider this conflict and this sort of situation to be part of the armed conflict in Colombia that's been going on for the past 40 years with the FARC guerrillas, ELN, even sort of the subsequent paramilitary groups. And Stephanie touched on that just a second ago. But they consider this more to be a narco trafficking issue. So all of their policies into engage in this threat and engage in this situation is more of a narco trafficking sort of policy and sort of strategy. So with that, the actual strategy that the government does have is to first of all target the economic activity of these groups and get to their financial resources to the very core. And this is going to involve drug interdiction, crop eradication, freezing the assets, and intercepting. These things are called drug subs, which are actually these makeshift submarines that they use to traffic drugs back and forth throughout the region. So we depicted that a little bit in this pyramid here. Financial sources and is what the government particularly targets. Then they work their way up towards the leadership, and then the membership at large in the very top of the pyramid. Some of the challenges that the government has been dealing with when engaging this Bakram threat, and some of the challenges that we've identified in talking to the government folks and the other people we've talked to down there, is this is not just a narco trafficking issue. This strategy that they use to target this threat is a lot more robust than just narco trafficking, and so it requires a lot more broader policy in order to do so. And Stephanie mentioned this sort of diverse portfolio of all the things that they're dealing with the money laundering, the prostitution rings, and the human trafficking, things like that, but also things like illegal mining, which presents a lot of environmental issues as well. So it's a lot more broader, it's a lot more complicated than just narco trafficking. Also, it's going to require a lot more than just the military of Colombia in order to tackle this issue. The military in Colombia doesn't have jurisdiction over actually making arrests and singling out a lot of these leaders. So they're used more to sort of augment the law enforcement that are actually making these arrests and actually do have jurisdiction over and arrest power over these Bakrams. Probably the third challenge that we identify is the resiliency of the Bakram organizations in Colombia, meaning that the leadership in particular, when one leader is captured or killed by the police force, there's always somebody right beneath him to take his place. So we've seen this in a lot of other situations as well, like the FARC and some of the other guerrilla groups in Colombia, and this is actually no different in this case. Probably the last and probably the most significant challenge that we identified is the corruption and intimidation of the government officials that are coming into contact with the Bakram organizations. And this will include the police officers, the government officials, as well as the elected officials that are coming into contact with the Bakram leaders and members overall. So at the very lowest level, this will mean that, for example, a couple of police officers are working to be on a street corner. A Bakram member will approach the two officers and either pay them off to look the other way when they're doing their illegal activity, or actually threaten and intimidate the police officers, threaten to hurt their families. And they use this as a way to intimidate, coerce, and stiff-arm the policemen from doing their jobs. But at the actual higher level, the Bakrams will get to the elected officials, buy them off, or even bring them in to as a means to sway the political agenda in their favor. What we recommend to the government of Colombia is to continue this sort of three-pronged approach and to continue to engage the leadership of the backrooms, continue to engage the membership at large of the backrooms, the actual foot soldiers who are doing the dirty work, and also the public officials and the government officials who are more vulnerable to coercion and persuasion by the backroom organizations throughout the country. So with that, we have a few recommendations to target this public aspect of it, to engender this public dialogue, make sure that this problem is well known throughout the community. Protection for those who report corruption, meaning the civilians and the citizens in the community who are affected by this, being able to provide them with protection from coercion or intimidation by these backroom organizations. Increase backup for the police officers who are working the beats, who are vulnerable to being coerced or intimidated or stiff-armed in any way by the backrooms. Incentives and protection for police officers who are blowing the whistle, who are trying to do the right thing, giving these folks more protection in order to do so. Increased penalties for criminal connections, meaning those individuals and those government officials who are susceptible to corruption, actually tweaking the policy to punish those a lot stiffer. And also, finally, increasing the vetting and the background checks for the government officials who are elected to office and making sure they're putting the people in the government in the right places. Now, with this approach, we hope that this will at least reduce this backroom threat to an acceptable level. The government of Colombia hopes to eliminate altogether this threat by 2014, and we think that this will at least mitigate a lot of the threat